So today we're going to be talking about Arnold. Now what Arnold is its own renderer, and we've been using Maya software for the most part, but Arnold is pretty much leaps and bounds ahead of Maya software in what it can do. So what it does is it adds a lot of different options for your projects and pretty much brings your renders, your lighting, shadows, caustics, everything to the next level. And it's really awesome. So like in the last video, what I have here is just a simple setup for my project. So I just got these cubes on a plane, nothing too crazy, but it's going to look amazing in comparison. So what I'm going to actually do right now is I'm going to go in, I am going to get rid of my extra renders from the last video. So I'm just going to go in, get rid of those. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to show you the difference. So if I render this right now, it should be just the standard lighting within Maya. So we end up having something like this. We're now going to start switching to Arnold. So Arnold is so much better when it comes to rendering. The only problem with it is it takes a lot more time to render because it's doing a lot more calculations in the background. So we'll talk about that for a little bit, and then we'll get right into it. So in the last lesson we talked about lighting, and to get to your lights you create them in here. But if you notice, you also have an Arnold tab right here. And since we're talking about Arnold, we're going to talk about the Arnold Lights. So Arnold has its own lights that work really well with Arnold, but they don't work with Maya software. Maya software lights work with Arnold, but not too well. You kind of have to finagle with them a little bit and tweak them to your liking. So Arnold lights are very cool. So just to go over them really quick, we have an area light which works very similar to the area light in Maya software. We have sky dome light, which works really well. It basically adds a sphere around your object and pretty much takes lighting from an image that you create. We're going to talk about that a lot later. We have a mesh light, which is basically lights coming from objects. So if you had something, let's just say a light bulb or a flashlight or anything like that, anything that's going to emit lights, that would emit light, you could use a mesh light to do it. It's really cool. Photometric light, we're not going to really talk about too much. Light portal, we're not going to really talk too much about. Physical sky is also really cool. We're really going to be focusing on sky dome lights and physical skies for this lesson, because they're just so useful and really easy to use. So with this area right here, we just have our cubes on our plane, but we're going to start using Arnold Shaders as well. So I'm going to go into my hypershade right now, and what I'm going to do is normally we would create materials through here, so through the materials tab, and use the Maya software ones. Those aren't as fun as Arnold ones. So what we're going to do is instead I'm going to scroll down a bit, and we have all these different shaders. We're not going to use too many of them. We're just going to use this Arnold surface shader. So I'm going to go into Arnold shader surface, and I'm going to look at all these really cool ones. I'm going to go and just use the standard surface for now. So by default, it is a little bit like a blend. Let me actually add it to my cubes. So let me just go in, standard AI standard surface, and it's going to make things a lot cooler. So now that I have that, one thing that's really awesome with Arnold is it has presets. It saves a lot of time when it comes to making certain things. So if I look right here in my color, normally we'd mess around with that. We're not going to. We're going to use a preset. Let me go to actually my AR standard surface. So the presets, we have things like chrome, balloon, so it's like a rubbery, car paint, velvet, copper foam, diamond, gold, all these really cool things. I'm going to try, let's go with gold for today. And look at that. Look at that beautiful color we have on it. And since I already have the Arnold standard surface shader on my cubes, we have gold on it. So right now it looks black, and that's because it doesn't show you the textures in your regular view, but if we rendered this out, so if I go in and render this out, it should also just still be like this weird yellow color because I'm still in Maya software. If I switch to Arnold Renderer and render the same image out, it's going to end up becoming black. The reason it's black like that, let me actually make this smaller for later. The reason it's black like that is because we don't have any lights. We need some lights for Arnold. Maya software has its own lighting and has a default lighting. So with Arnold, we have to make our own. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go into Arnold, go to Lights, and we're going to create a sky dome light. So by default, a sky dome light is just a generalized white light. It's very similar to the Maya software standard light. But if I go in and render this now, look how cool that looks. Our cubes have shadows, they have depth, they have a lot better color. We could increase the resolution later on, but for this, it looks really, really good. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how we can make this look even better. So going into this, let me actually render this through my camera. Look at that. As you can see, it is rendering a little bit slower than the Maya software would normally, but for the quality difference, it's really nice. So you might also hear my computer start amping up a bit because it is kind of chugging along to render this. So let's just save that for now. So that looks really good. And then the next thing we're going to talk about is this sky dome light. So like I said, it pretty much is putting off a generalized light through the world, but we could change that to have really interesting values. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go into the attribute editor of my sky dome light. So if you're not on it, you just click on your sky dome light, and I'm going to change the color of it. In order to do that, I'm just going to click on this checker box, and instead of changing the color of white, I'm going to actually add a file, and I'm going to add what's called an HDRI image. So I'm just going to go into my folder, I'm going to go to desktop. I have this really nice picture of sky. It's an HDRI sky image. If you need to find one to use, you can always just put it in and find your own. So what I have right now is just this HDRI image, and it basically puts a sphere around my world and pretty much has like that. What this will do is it will take the information from this image and project that as light onto my project. So if I look at it right here, I do have this saved, right? Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to re-render this. And you should be able to see a little bit of a difference in the lighting. So right off the bat, we can already see the changes in it. This gives you a more realistic, more natural looking light. Because you can see like the blues of the sky, a little bit of the clouds, and everything else that's in that image kind of carrying over. So like things like the mountains or trees that we would have in this would kind of carry over into that. So like if I save this right now and look at the difference, we have just a generalized bright light versus a more natural looking image. Super cool. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to delete my sky dome light, and we're going to use what's called the physical sky. So what that does is it will actually create a realistic sky in my scene. So if I re-render this, this should be fairly similar, but it's using Maya's own sky. And we can do really cool things with it. So you see the light right here is coming off of it, so the sun's like directly above right now. And we could just kind of work around how this is. So let me just wait for that to finish rendering. I'll save it. And you could see a difference between the two, like night and day. So we've got little around midday right now, and it's really working well. And the cool thing about it is we could go into the physical sky attributes and change up this information to get whatever type of sky we want. So like, let's just say I have it at 45 degrees, which is kind of around midday. The sun's starting to go down, or actually the sun's starting to go up, and it's about halfway. So like if I want, let's just say the sun to be directly above my project, and I re-render this, you can see that the sun is directly above. It's coming right down. You can see that in the reflections on the top right here. So I'm just going to cancel this render for now to really show you something cool. So we can work with this in various ways. So I'm going to change this back to 45 for now. And we can work with different things here. So we have intensity, how bright the sun is, the azimuth, the turbidity, which will kind of just show how the sun goes through like an ozone layer or smog or anything like that. It really depends on what you want to do with it. So if I ended up, let's just say, changing this to 0, that means the sun is pretty much all the way down, and we should end up with a very dark picture, as if it was nighttime. So the sun's pretty much setting right along our horizon line and right off the edge. You can see the shadows kind of coming in. So it works really, really well. So there's one thing I want to talk about in the Arnold renderer that you can't do in the Maya software renderer. Oops. Did I actually not change the time? Yeah, I didn't change the time of day. Let me change that to 0 and then re-render it so you see. So there we go. That's better. That you can see the sun setting. So it's like that deep, deep reddish orange kind of just coming in over my cubes. So one of the best things about the Arnold renderer is we have what's called the IPR renderer. And what that does is, let me open this up. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so we can see a couple things at the same time. Get rid of that. I'm going to bring you over, let's bring you over here for now. So we have what's called the IPR renderer, which basically it's a separate renderer for Arnold. And it is a little tasking, but it is basically what's called a live renderer. So what it does is it will render something at low quality and then do passes over it as it stays in this one section. What I mean by that is, if I, let's just say, have the renderer running right now, and I want to see what it looks like at 95 elevation, it will re-render it automatically for me. Or if, for whatever reason, let me turn this off. You always want to turn it off when you're changing things. So like, let's just say I want to do it to my perspective camera, and I'll turn it back on. Let me cancel that render for now. So what I'm doing now, if I move around in this scene, it will re-render everything for me, and it will increase the quality as we're going on. You could definitely hear my computer start amping up, so I'm going to stop it for now. I don't usually recommend doing it at high quality, but it's really interesting in getting good views or good renders. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is the render settings itself. So if I go to my render settings right here, we have pretty much the same setup as we do with Maya software, except we also get this Arnold renderer tab, which will allow us to increase our quality of our projects. You don't really need to do too much with this. We could turn a progressive renderer on, which will kind of give you a little bit better quality and things like that. Another thing we could do is we could kind of work with these different type of filters. So if I wanted to add atmosphere, we could. So like, let's just say, let's just see if we can do it with this Maya software right now. Let's see, is that still in there? No. Okay. So if I go into Arnold, let's go through the Arnold renderer. Let's just say I wanted something like let's add an atmosphere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a volumetric atmosphere. And what that will do is if I go in and render my camera, it should give you a little bit more crispness in there. And we could add things like fog or anything like that. But it's very interesting to work with, and it pretty much is up to you with how you want to work with it. Let me cancel this. So if I want to create fog, I could create fog now, increase it, and it will give me a little fogginess there, and that fogginess will come from the light. So Arnold Renderer works super well when it comes to creating really cool, more realistic renders at higher quality. There is a couple of things I will talk about before we finish up here, and that is increasing things like changing this from HD to 4K or increasing the resolution will increase the amount of time it takes to render. The more things you have and the more shaders you have going on with it will also increase that render by a lot. So you do want to be a little careful and wary when you're rendering your projects. But that's pretty much all there is to it, the general basics of Arnold Lights and rendering. Thanks. Have a nice day.